Yeah.
Okay, we're going to start the Gemara tonight. Rabba and Rabba. I'm sure, it's not overkill what we've done in the Mishnah to by any stretch of imagination, but I think we can continue on to the Gemara. So we'd like to discuss Rabba a little bit tonight. Yeah, you got it?
I've got it.
We got the Gemara on face and one off. My timer, what's the reason for what?
Van een nichtam.
Good. What's the reason for van een nichtam? Rabba says the fisha ain't bikin lishma. Rabba says because they're not bikin lishma. And Rabba says the fisha ain't edim mitzurin lekaima, because there's no edim around for you to be mekayim the star, for you to try to find edim to see if this is a true star or not. So therefore, says van nichtam, that's good enough. We won't even go into the differences now. We'll stick just to this. Let's see the Rashis first. It's going to be very interesting in this Rashi. The fisha ein bikin lishma. Top Rashi and off base on that base. Ein b'nei Medina Sayam b'nei Torah. The people of Medina Sayam are not b'nei Torah. Ve'ein yoidim shetzarch lichtei v'aget l'shem ha'isha. And they don't know that we have to write the get for the woman. But we do. Ukroksiv, it's a mefursha din daraisa, the chosav lo sefer grisus. You have to write a sefer grisus. I think Rabbi Cohen tonight from Gush spoke about that. Lo, dahainu lishma. Lo means lishma. Hilkach. Therefore, now let's see what he's going to say. What would you say therefore? What does b'fonei nechtam tell me? If I were to ask you, what should it tell me? Does it tell you lishma? Is that what it tells you? What does b'fonei nechtam do?
Before nichtam tells you that you have to sign it in the presence.
I watched them sign it. That's what he's saying. I watched them sign it. And therefore what?
It doesn't say Lishma.
It doesn't say Lishma. Or does it say Lishma? What do you think?
It doesn't.
Well,
right?
maybe it doesn't infer from it that it does. What's the reason why I have to do nichtam and nichtam?
So let's see what Rashi says. Let's see if Rashi has something to say about this. Says Rashi, Hilkach Omer, 3 lines down. Hilkach Omer shliach b'fonei nechtam b'fonei nechtam. You say b'fonei nechtam b'fonei nechtam. U'memele shailinan lei. Therefore, we're going to ask them im nichtav l'shma. The next step is we ask him, was it written l'shma? V'hu Omer in, and he says yes, it was written l'shma. Well, Kamei Mefarish, and later on he's going to explain, my time nami lishma. The Gemara later on is going to explain, well, if that's what we're trying to do, why don't I say b'fonei nichtav lishma, b'fonei nechtam lishma? Yeah? Right? But,
right.
And we'll see soon, we'll see Tosfos' question, then we'll come back to
Rashi. Why it doesn't say lishma later on? Because it's going to confuse you if it's too long.
Yeah, that's right. That's what the Gemara says later on. The reason you don't say b'fonei nechtam lishma, b'fonei nechtam lishma, because you might get confused, you might not say it, you might get it wrong. So this way we want to know that you're doing everything 100% right. So you say b'fonei nechtam. So Rashi says, within b'fonei nechtam, it's a very, very important Rashi, yeah? Because what did Rashi say? Does it lie within b'fonei nechtam lishma? Can we infer from b'fonei nechtam lishma? Yes or no?
Yeah, Mela Shailinon.
What does that mean? Mela Shailinon.
Well, automatically we learn out from this.
No, what does Shailinon mean?
We learn out.
No, Shailinon is add the aleph over there. It's the Aramaic for shoyalin. What does shoyalin mean?
Ask.
We ask. What does it mean? We ask them.
We ask them if
we ask them if it's a shema, meaning what?
That we
meaning
have to ask them further, so it doesn't.
So correct. Meaning, if we have to ask them further, it obviously doesn't infer the shema, because if it did infer the shema, if I said b'fonei nechtam, they go givaldik the shema. Yeah, but that's not what they're saying. I'm saying b'fonei nechtam. They said, hey, hold on. Did you see it was the shema? Yeah, good. No, we got it wrong. Yeah, yeah. So we see that this is one very, very important point in Rashi. B'fonei nechtam does not prove the shema, and in it of itself, it's not good enough. Yeah, you see what Rashi is saying? Do you see how Rashi is saying that it's not good enough? Because Rashi says, because then we're going to go, and then the Bezdin is going to ask him if it was the shema, and he'll say yes. Meaning what? Did b'fonei nechtam tell you that it was lishma?
No.
So then it's not good enough, right? According to Rabbah, what's the whole reason you're saying b'fonei nechtam? Only because of what?
Lishma.
But you didn't do it. So they're saying B'fanei Nechtam is going to get the Lishma ball rolling.
So you ask them afterwards.
So you ask them afterwards, was it Lishma? And he says yes. But B'fanei Nechtam in and of itself, if they didn't ask him the question, is not good enough. Yeah, that's a big chiddush.
Okay.
Yeah, you see why that's a big chiddush, because the Gemara doesn't say anywhere that you need something else other than B'fanei Nechtam. And maybe get Medinah that's what he has to say. And then automatically Bezdin knows that that's a code word to ask now, did he write it Lishma? And he has to say yes or no, and from that we'll figure it out. So B'fanei Nechtam is only the thing to get the ball rolling, but it's not the full solution.
Why couldn't we say the way around? Say one of the Mishnah write it Lishma, and from that we infer that they have to say B'fanei Nechtam.
No, if you had written Lishma, then I would have said when you come you have to say Lishma. I wouldn't have said B'fanei Nechtam is really it's counterintuitive according to Rashi. It's not really what we're looking to say. We're looking to say that was the Shema. So then say it's the Shema. Well, no, I'll say something else. I'll say B'fanei Nechtam. So if the Mishnah says, maybe get Menina Sayam, he has to say it's the Shema, so what would you say? He has to say the Shema or B'fanei Nechtam? You'd say he has to say the Shema. You wouldn't say B'fanei Nechtam. We'll have to see later on in the Gemara, then why are we saying B'fanei Nechtam? If the point according to Rashi is to say the Shema,
well, the Mishnah says say the Shema.
Well, if the Mishnah said the Shema, then I would say the Shema.
Just the Shema, without the other two.
Yeah, but so we'll have to see that. That's a good question. We'll have to see in the Gemara why the Chachamim felt to make the Takana, which is a very good question. The Gemara is going to ask that. If I could say the Shema, why not have to say B'fanei Nechtam and have Bezdin start probing me? What is the Shema? Just say the Shema. Yeah?
That's automatically going in.
Yeah? So just say what you need to say. Yeah, don't beat around the bush to get people to somehow follow you and go, oh, but did you mean that? Yes. Oh, very good. So why didn't you say so? Yeah?
I see that as an obvious point. Why didn't the mission just write it?
Well, we'll have to say it's a very good question, and we're going to have to see it in the Gemara. That's it's interesting. But look at what Rashi asked. Now let me just deal with that point, because I think there's a very, very important point here in Rashi. Let's see what the Rashi says. U'lekamei mefarish. Read that Rashi. Who can read that Rashi?
Which Rashi?
The end of that Rashi, Lefi she'en mikil lishma. You got the end of the Rashi there, Benji?
The end of the Rashi.
Or the Kamei Mefarish, last word of the Rashi.
And in front of him it was explained.
Or later on, it means later on the Gemara is going to explain.
My time a lot at Swichu, why do you not need
Nami Lemeimar also to say Lishma?
Right.
Okay, let's wait later. We'll find out soon.
That's what I'm trying to point out to you. What did Rashi say? Rashi said, I'm going to explain to you later what?
Why you need to write Lishma?
No, not why you need to write Lishma.
Why, need to do Lishma?
Why does he not also say B'fanei Nechtam Lishma?
He doesn't need to, only.
But your question is the other way around.
Well, we explained later in the Gemara.
Just say Lishma.
Just say Lishma. That's not Rashi's question. Rashi's saying a different question.
Why did you say Lishma in the first place? You didn't say at all.
Why does he not write Lishma in the Gemara?
Why does he not say B'fanei Nechtam Lishma, B'fanei Nechtam Lishma?
Because we say later on.
So Rashi is saying that the Gemara is going to say, well, if the point is to get to Lishma, then he should say B'fanei Nechtam Lishma, B'fanei Nechtam Lishma. That's what Rashi is asking. You're asking a very different question, which I'm not saying is not a good question. Maybe the Gemara will deal with it later. But your question is very different. Your question is, forget about B'fanei Nechtam. Show up and Bezdin and say, Rabbi Sai Lishma. Yeah? Thank you. Yeah? So I'll have to work that out, and we'll see in a minute, Tosfos is going to deal with that in a not in that direct way, but Tosfos is going to deal with that question. And let's see the question of Tosfos.
Which Tosfos?
The Tosfos, the Fishay Mekin Lishma, the first Tosfos over here, the Fishay Mekin Lishma. Is that an amazing question, I think, in Tosfos. Tosfos asks a question, V'im Toimar. Well, let me ask you the question. If the Bnei Medina Sayam are not Bnei Torah, what would they or would they not know about get?
Lishma.
Is that all that they won't know about get?
Anything. They won't know about anything about the get.
Oh. See? You hear what Benji's saying?
That implies it's not Lishma as well. Lishma is the most important thing.
Is Lishma the most important thing? There's a lot of other bits and pieces. Yeah. I don't know that much about Gittin either, but I've been to Bezdin, and there's a lot of things that go on at a get at a Bezdin. You need, from a Sadi Kiddushin, you can have a guy looking through a whole kuntras, and it's pretty simple. Gittin, unless you really, really know what you're talking about, don't touch it with a 10-foot pole.
Yeah.
It's really difficult. There's a lot to know about Gittin, and there's people that are Masada Gittin, and they have a lot of experience.
Lishma on a piece of paper and the names.
You don't know how many times they ask Lishma. You should see. Maybe I can bring it once. You should see the Seder Haget that they have. Did you watch him pick up the pen Lishma? Did you watch him write the first line Lishma? Did the Adam say the sign in Lishma? Did the Adam know that it was Lishma? Did you see that they asked the Lishma like 16 times? Every different facet of Lishma. They're really, really particular about Lishma. There's a lot of other dinim that go into Gittin as well. Yeah? So therefore Taisus asked the question that Benji is saying. Once you're telling me that people are not Bnei Torah and they don't know about Gittin, why are you picking on what?
Lishma.
What should we pick on? Everything.
No.
Yeah? Why are we limiting this and saying, you know what, people don't know about Lishma. Mechubar Lekarka, yeah, that they know. And they know how to write the names. You know how difficult it is to write the names? You know, they write, when they sit down with people, they sit down with them before they say to them, okay, what's your name? Reuven. Do you have any nicknames? Yeah. Ruvi, yeah. Ralph, yeah. And Ray. Okay, so now you have to write Reuven, the mystery Reuven, who is also called Ralph, who's also called Ray, who's also called Ruvi. And you need to spell each one of those names correctly. The son of, and then because the get has to be literally written perfectly, that you can identify the guy perfectly. So if he's got some nicknames, those nicknames go in there. And, you know, how do you write Ralph in Hebrew? Yeah?
Reish Lamed Pei.
Is it Reish Lamed Pei? Or is it Reish Aleph Lamed Pei? Or Reish Ayin Lamed Pei? You know?
Just do them all.
Pardon? But you can't write all of them. You have to. You can't just write brackets. So you have to. So there's rules exactly how to write names. Even in Ksubas, there's rules in how to not write names. So we, for example, here in our shul, you have to send down to the United Synagogue. We get a chief rabbi's authorization for marriage, and we get with that authorization we get a letter of exactly how to spell all the names and how to spell the town. Yeah. So Manchester, how do you spell Manchester? Because there's, pardon?
It's pretty heavy.
Yeah, well, you don't know. Well, there is no CH in Hebrew. And that tzaddik with the little line on top, that's a modern invention. But that's not really, Gittin weren't written that way 150, 200 years ago. They didn't exist, that tzaddik with a line on top. That's modern Hebrew, since like Eliezer ben Yehuda. So how do you write Manchester? Is it you write Manchester with a shin? Or do you write Manchester tough shin? Or do you write, there's like different ways of writing. It's really complicated. A get's really complicated. Everything about a get is complicated. So you're going to say everything about a get is complicated. And they know everything. Lishma, they forgot. Yeah? Doesn't make sense. So Rashi asked, the Taisa asked the question, Vim Toimar, Ma'ishna Lishma de'ein b'kin mishah halachos Gittin. Why is it Lishma that they don't know about Lishma more than any other rule? For example, Mechubar Lekarka, if something is connected, you can't write a get on a piece that's connected to the ground and then cut it out. Or Shinu Shma Yushma, writing different names. V'nichta b'yoyim v'nechta b'layla, writing it in the day and signing it at night. And then he brings a raya. So we'll skip the raya because that's not important for now. But he brings a raya that it's not only that. When it's lav dafka, you can't say it's lav dafka. Rabbeinu Tam. So we're going to go. There's about 10 lines down in the Taisus. The last 3 words in the line, still in the thin lines. Rabbeinu Tam. You got it, Benji? You got it? That's right.
Rabbeinu Tam.
It's a
Haim. Higher up here.
Haim's on the same line.
Right. Yeah, you got it.
Same line as Haim.
Rabbeinu Tam. The Bechol Hilchos Gittin Bekin. They really, you're right. They really do know all the halachas of Gittin. Ela dahach drosha v'kosav alishma eina niris lahem ikar drosha. Do you know what it is? They've heard of lishma. Not pshat, they've never heard of lishma. They know how to write the names and they know how to write the get, and they know the get has to be written on 13 lines and exactly what the text of the get is and how to be Messiah the get. They know everything about a get. You know what they don't know? They don't know lishma. Says Tosfos, highly unlikely. It doesn't even make sense to say that they don't know lishma. Therefore, what is it that they don't know? Do you know what they don't know? They don't know how important Lishma is. So of course they know there's a din of lishma. But they might say, you know what, lishma, yeah, you know, the kosav la lishma. Nice. That's a nice thing. But I'm not going to fuss about it. I'm not going to fret about it. Okay, so it wasn't written lishma, it wasn't written lishma. Big deal. So therefore we make a fuss about lishma. They're not bikin lishma. What's the problem with that? And Tosfos is going to deal with it now. What does the fish ein bikin lishma mean? What do the word translate le'ein bikin lishma? How do you translate that?
It wasn't written lishma. They weren't experts to write it lishma.
They weren't experts to write it lishma. Yeah? Meaning they don't know that you should write it lishma. That's what it means. They're not bikin lishma, meaning they're not experts to write it lishma. Is that what Tosfos is saying?
He's saying that they're not experts to know how important lishma is.
But that's not really what the Gemara says, right?
Right.
Because the Gemara says they're not expert in writing. They don't know that you have to write lishma. Or they don't know that you have, and here these people don't know that you have to write lishma. They just don't make it that important. That's not what the Gemara is saying. So Tosfos has to deal with that. So Tosfos is going to deal with it right away. Tosfos says, "Ve'ein bikin." When the Gemara says "ein bikin," pirush, we have to explain. That means "ein choshesh nidrosha de lishma." It means that they're not so worried about the drosha of lishma. It doesn't mean that they don't know about lishma, but it means they don't find it important enough. They don't give it enough importance.
Right.
That's what ein bikin lishma means. But Tosfos has to deal with that because Tosfos says, at the end of the day, I need to work with the words of the Gemara. This is always very, very important. That you have to look back. When Tosfos says something, when Rashi says something, you have to go back and say, okay, let's read the words of the Gemara and see if does that fit into the words. So Tosfos says, I've said a very nice shot right now, but it doesn't fit into the words. You can say the nicest things in the world, but if it doesn't seem to, very often you get a guy that says, like, yes, I'll tell you a shot and this and this and this, and that's why. Yeah. Okay, but read the Gemara. The Gemara doesn't say that, right? So it's very nice, but that's definitely not shot in the Gemara, because if it was shot in the Gemara would say so. It doesn't. Yeah? So therefore he says, Ve'ein bikirin pirush. The explanation of ein bikirin is ein choshesh in the drosha lishma. Ula'ach shalom l'kamon means after they were mekabel this drosha. Now he continues to the next point. V'ha de pirush akuntris, which Rashi mentions, de memela shailinan lei ihave lishma ve'omar in. Memela, we will ask them if it's lishma, and they will say in, meaning that Rashi says that b'fanei nechtam is not good enough, right? Like we said before. I disagree with that. Yeah? What does that mean? And nowhere does it say that you have to ask. Meaning what? If this is part of protocol, then what should it say in the Torah? What should the Gemara tell you? What should it say in the Gemara? You say b'fanei and then the fellow says, hey, 1 second, does that mean it was lishma? And you say, yes, it means it was lishma.
It doesn't have to even say that.
But the Gemara doesn't say that. So the Gemara doesn't say that, so something's missing. Pardon? Obviously it's good enough. That's what Tosfos is saying. Because if it wasn't good enough, somewhere in this whole Maseches Gittin of 90 dafin, somewhere the Gemara should sneak in and say, hey, you know what? Lefanei nechtam is not good enough, because you need to then ask the question of the Shema, and then that question needs to be answered. And if you can't answer, then lefanei nechtam is useless. Yeah? Because that's what Rashi is saying.
How would Rashi answer that?
We'll have to see. We'll have to get to that. That'll be a good question in Rashi.
So what's the question?
Yeah, the question on Rashi is as follows. What did Rashi say? What did we say before in Rashi? Is lefanei nechtam good enough or not good enough? Is it on its own?
On its own, b'fanei nechtam is not good enough.
Correct. Why?
Because it might as well just write lishma if you're going
to. And what do you? So therefore, I say b'fanei nechtam. What does Bezdin have to do?
They have to say, did you write it lishma?
And I have to say either yes or no, right? So says Tosfos, I got a very big problem with that, because if that's really what Rashi is saying, what the Gemara wants you to do you know who should have told me that instead of Rashi? Who should have really told me that?
Gemara.
Does the Gemara say that anywhere?
No, it doesn't.
So says Tosfos, then it can't be right. If that's what the Gemara wants me to do, I should say Lishma, I should say B'fanei nechtam. You should say, is it Lishma? And I should say yes. Somewhere, the Gemara should have said that.
Right.
And it's not. So therefore, it says Tosfos, I don't see where Rashi's coming from. How can Rashi tell me that I have to ask him Lishma, and then what's he going to answer? He's going to answer either yes or no. I've never seen that in the Gemara. You made that up. Tosfos is blaming Rashi and saying, you made that up. Can't just make things up. If it's not in the Gemara, how did you make that up? The mashmos of the Gemara is, if I would have asked you, before we saw Rashi, if I had asked you a question, you say, is that all you need? Yeah. Without seeing Rashi, what would you have said, Benji?
If you said...
Is it good enough or not good enough?
No.
No, without Rashi. Forget about Rashi. If you didn't know what Rashi said, and you read the Mishnah says, would you say that means and something else?
No, you would not. You
definitely would. You say yeah? So therefore, says Tosfos, if I don't see it in the Gemara, I don't think you can somehow pull this out of a hat. Do you know what the difference between Rabbah and Rabbah will be? A very simple difference between Rabbah and Rabbah. Do you know what the difference is? The next question. Meaning, Rabbah says, do you know why I need to say B'fanachtam? Ein Mekim Nishma. And therefore, what happens according to Rabbah? Let's go through the scenario according to Rabbah. Let's go through the scenario according to Rabbah. According to Rabbah, and according to Rashi, man walks into Bezdin and he says, B'fanai nechtam. What does Bezdin say to him?
Lishma or not.
And what does he have to answer? Yes or no? Yeah. According to Rabbah, he walks into Bezdin and says, and Rabbah says nothing to do with Lishma. He walks into Bezdin and says, B'fanai nechtam. What does Bezdin say to him?
Do you have an aid with you?
No, you don't have to say that. Because he's believed with one. Now we'll have to see that in the Gemara. So what does Bezdin say to him after he says, B'fanai nechtam? Actually, nothing. Right. Yeah? There's nothing. Because according to Rabbah, in it of itself is good enough. Because I say, meaning I watched the Edom sign, and I can verify, I can vouch that this was signed by kosher Edom. Good. Doesn't have to probe again and says, oh, by the way, did you watch the Edom sign it? And that's what I just said. I just said I watched the Edom sign it.
Well, in regards to mitzvah, before I nichtam, so it makes sense.
Sorry again?
In regards to mitzvah in the camera. What Rabbah says, you can infer from that because you need to see someone sign it and write it, that you can infer it's possible to infer from that you need someone with you to understand the signatures of a get. Because when you say before I nichtam, that sort of makes sense to. Do you know the signatures of it?
Yeah, that does make sense for the signatures.
In regards to
Lishma,
no.
Right.
But for Rabbah it makes sense.
Correct. So for Rabbah it makes sense, and for Rabbah it doesn't make sense. So therefore, when the Gemara now asks the question, what's the difference between Rabbah and Rabbah? And the Gemara starts bringing me different examples. Before I start bringing examples, I can give a simple difference according to Rashi. According to Rabbah, you walk into Bezdin, you say, what's Bezdin going to say?
Yes or no? Lishma or no?
Yeah. According to Rabbah, I walk into Bezdin, I say, what's Bezdin going to say? Nothing. Thank you very much. Yeah? Bezdin says, you said I'm good. I have no more questions. No further questions, Your Honor. Yeah?
Right.
So what's the difference between the two of them?
Well, Bezdin would say you have an aid with you.
You don't need an aid, no, because he's the aid. One aid is good enough to, until the husband comes along and says it's no good, one aid is good enough to say it's good. Yeah? That Tosfos says that over here on the bottom. And the Gemara says it later on. So therefore, according to Rabbah, there'll be a question of whether or not you wrote it Lishma. According to Rabbah, in it of itself is good enough. So when the Gemara asks, what's the difference between Rabbah and Rabbah? You know what the Gemara should answer? The difference between Rabbah and Rabbah is, according to Rabbah, I have another question that I need to ask before I have actually finished everything that I need to say. And according to Rabbah, I don't have another question I need to ask because in it of itself does the whole job.
Okay.
Yeah? You understood? Did you understand you understand the question?
Rabbah, in of itself, it does the job, the PNB, before I nichtav. According to Rabbah, no, it does not.
And therefore, the difference between the two of them is whether you need to ask another question or not. Right. So when the Gemara asks, "My banai," what's the difference? You should say a very simple difference. Do I need to ask another question, or do I not need to ask another question? That should be the difference.
Well, in accordance to Rabbah,
pardon?
What Rabbah's saying, why would Beis Din have to ask him, did you do Lishma or not? If you should just say, did you do it before I nichtam, then according to Rabbah, you would infer from that. Lishma.
No, but you don't. You don't infer from it. What Tosfos says is, Rashi says, and therefore they're going to ask him. Then therefore we're going to ask him if it was written Lishma, and he's going to say yes. We're not doing this on its own. It's only after we ask him the question, only then can we infer it. Can we say that that's good enough? So we got a problem. So therefore it says, V'ayimari, Tistama lishma kol masid, Kiripirish v'kundus nami b'samuch. Therefore the Ri says no. When it says, B'fonai nechta, b'fonai nechtam, within b'fonai nechta, b'fonai nechtam, part of that edus is what? That it was written lishma. Not like Rashi that I need to ask another question. No more questions. I say b'fonai nechta, b'fonai nechtam, good enough. That's all I need to say.
That's the Rabbah.
Even according to Rabbah.
Even according to Rabbah, the Ri says that you can infer from it.
You can infer from it, and that's what he meant. Yeah? Okay, well, we'll skip out on that question. So the Gemara then, we'll skip on the next question in Taisus because we'd have to see the Gemara further on to really understand that question. So, I mean, it's 10 o'clock already. I think we'll finish here. But basically, one second. Basically, what comes out from this now, as of now, because we'll see there's still one or two more opinions. Number one is that according to Rashi, the Fonai Nechta, Fonai Nechtam is not good enough to prove the Shema. And what you need to do is you need to actually then ask him a question, and he needs to answer it. According to Taisus, it's good enough to prove the Shema. And the reason we ask only the Shema and nothing else is not because they don't know about the Shema, but rather because what? They're not as strict about it as they should be about it. Yeah? And we'll see that there's a Taisus or Rosh that argues with this, and we'll see that there's others. There's a few other reasons, and there's a very, very important question over here in the Ritva. Please go on next time.